Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Dialogue. I'm Taimur Shamil. This week was very significant in terms of geostrategy, geostrategical issues in the region. This week, United States and India signed a military pact, and this military pact primarily focuses on the availability of topographical, nautical, and aeronautical data that would be provided by United States to India. This is a big development, and recently we also saw a Quad meeting of Japan, Australia, United States and India, and these two developments are interlinked. They are very significant. As I said earlier, it is to be kept in mind that there is this new development in the region that is focusing on China, and we have also seen that Secretary Pompeo of United States, he has been focusing on anti-China rhetoric specifically. And this rhetoric has been criticizing the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, very categorically and aggressively. This time too, in this military pact, Secretary Pompeo criticized the Communist Party of China, and earlier in the Quad meeting, he was critical of China, so much so that he used the word exploitation, corruption and coercion for Chinese Communist Party. Earlier as well, the Quad was somehow silent on the rhetoric used by Secretary Pompeo. None of the other three used any sentence, let's say, or word regarding China. Today we are going to discuss about this significant development, the US involvement in the region. Many people, there is this sentiment, public sentiment in Pakistan and elsewhere in the region, that somehow United States has been fueling conflicts and crises in the region. There is this crisis going on in Afghanistan for the last 19 years, and we don't see any end to it in near future. Still, we see that there is violence going on in Afghanistan. Would this new pact, the military pact, fuel crisis or any kind of chaos and conflict in the future? Many people think that is very likely. But is India in a position to go for indirect confrontation with China or with Pakistan? And is this military pact focused on China or on Pakistan? We are going to discuss about this with our special guest in the studios. Our first guest is Brigadier Salim Butt, renowned analyst and expert on Pakistan's foreign policy and strategy. Sir, thank you for joining us. Our second guest is Senator Anwarul Haq Kakar, Pakistan's senior senator and member of the Senate's Committee on Foreign Affairs. Welcome to the show, Senator Kakar. We are also joined by Sitara Noor on Skype. She is an expert on strategy and Pakistan's foreign policy. Welcome to the show, Sitara. Thank you for joining us. I'll start with Brigadier Butt, talking about this development, this military pact between United States and India. How do you see this? Fueling a crisis or just specifically focused on China or Pakistan? How do you see it?
I think a month ago when Quad had its meeting in Tokyo, you remember we did a program on that, and
yes,
therein we discussed that Quad is being projected as a emergence of mini NATO in the region, in the Asia Pacific region. So what has just happened in the form of signing of BICA, which we Basic Exchange and Cooperation Program, it is very significant because it gives a quantum leap to the Indian military capability. Because what does it mean is that America would be providing top secret, real-time intelligence, satellite intelligence in the form of imageries that will enable Indian Air Force, Indian missile programs. I will cover the hypersonic missiles and their drones, military drones, their aircraft, their helicopters. They'll have the real-time intelligence and very precision-guided, very, very accurate capability India will gain. And that will mean what? Moving from, say, low-tech to mid-tech or mid-tech to high-tech. Because this agreement that they have signed also is paving the path for provision of latest avionics, electronics for the US provided aircraft, helicopters, missile technology to India. So India is going to get a quantum leap in terms of the technology that they have. Hypersonic missile and drone are going to be the first and the main beneficiary. India has just displayed, hypersonic missile carrier vehicles, which is a direct threat to China, but nevertheless, any capability that India acquires or be given in the garb of contesting and containing China, it threatens Pakistan first, because Pakistan is the only country that has fought 4 major wars with India, of course, for Kashmir. Including 71 debacle that we have had. But what had prevented the major conflict between the two countries, say an all-out war, was the strategic capability that Pakistan gained post-71. So that is why India never again ventured to cross the international borders, although on the line of control we are always in no war, no peace situation, and the limited war continues unabated for the last 73 years. But now when strategic stability that is very much imperative for maintaining peace in the region, that gets disturbed in both senses, in the conventional senses as well as in the unconventional senses. Because when strategic stability is disturbed, India would be short-circuiting the escalation ladder that we normally use this term in military, because when a conflict is about to start and you straight away use a punch which is not expected by your opponent, or if the opponent is not ready to receive and respond to that, so he could always go for some response which is not looked upon by the world. You understand what I mean? So therefore, this BICA is very, very critical as far as China, Pakistan, other SAARC countries are concerned. Nepal should be feeling upset. China is obviously upset, and they have conveyed their dismay and their anguish on this.
But this is very interesting, Senator Kakar. The intention of United States and of India. We know the intentions of India. But how do you see the US interest in the region, this pact specifically, military pact, and US intentions?
Thank you, Taimur, for having me on this show. To be honest with you, I do perceive it in the larger global kaleidoscopic events which are happening. And to me, it is more about waning and diminishing and declining of US military and economic might, rather than why they are trying to support India, or what is this flirtation. And particularly in the post-Ladakh situation, I do understand the Indian vulnerability when it is a military match between them and Chinese. So they might have felt isolated as no one in the world came to their rescue. So this is a kind of a rescue package also, which is sort of an ego massaging for the Indians, so that they are not alone. The Quad would be there, or Quad Plus would be there when they have to confront or encounter at least China. They won't be in confronting them. Always my assessment has been they will never confront China. They will only have a flirtation with the Western Hemisphere on the pretext that they will confront China and they'll get a good deal out of that. But they would like to have some sort of an arrangement which is acceptable both to Chinese and the Indians, and they can create a sort of a peaceful coexistence. So this self-delusional policy of the West, that in somehow or the other, China would be contained by the Quad Plus and India would have the lead role in that, is somehow self-deceptive. Will India play a military role or a military response in South China Sea? Would it be there to help, let's say, Philippines or Vietnam, or when the territorial claim from the Chinese side come forward? Because the actual theater would emerge in South China Sea rather than the Himalayan mountains. The Chinese have almost reached the #1 economy of the world. They probably would be sustaining that position for next few years or a decade or so. So this self-delusional relationship between the West and Quad Plus, I think so it would lose its relevance with the passage of time within few years. Ian Bremmer, I would quote here, the very prominent political scientist at Harvard. His latest work is on this G0-sum world, in which he says that every nation is for itself. So if the United States has to either contain or engage China, it has to be on its own. the
Right.
alliances of the country or countries probably wouldn't take them or lead them to the desired goals. So that's why a new sort of emergence of the strength of nation states would be lying in the future basket at the political arena.
Right, right.
So yes, in the real time, as Professor Saab explained, they would be sharing under the BECA all these satellite images and the rest. But we shouldn't forget that Chinese have already spent some $200 billion plus on quantum
That's right.
weaponry.
But this is very interesting.
Which is even more sophisticated in terms of technology than what Americans have.
But at the receiving end of this whole situation, it is not just China. We are going to discuss about this because it is Pakistan as well. They might not use it with China, but we have seen the Indian aggression and how that is going to play out in future.
Eventually, whatever they do, they remain Pakistan-centric.
Pakistan-centric. Eventually, that's right. Sitara, talking about this situation, so US is going to provide India with this topographical, nautical and aeronautical data that is considered vital for targeting missiles and armed drones. How do you see this military pact, and is it just China focused or Pakistan focused as well? How do you see the situation?
Thank you, Taimur, for having me on the show. China and to contain China's assertiveness in the region and what US labels as a Chinese threat, not only in the region but beyond region as well. Aimed at China, that definitely has great strategic significance and great strategic risks for Pakistan as well. And if I have to look at it, I would look at it from two perspectives. At the political front, it enhances India's political standing at the international level, of course, because as you rightly pointed out, that BECA is one of the three foundational agreements that India has signed with the United States over the past 1 decade. The first one being the Logistics Exchange Memorandum Agreement that was signed in 2016, that essentially allowed the militaries of the US and India to replenish from one another's bases and access supplies, etc. And the second one was Communication Capability and Security Arrangement, COMCASA, which was signed in 2018. That pact allowed the US to provide India with the encrypted communications equipment and systems so that Indian and US military commanders and the aircraft and ships of the two countries could actually communicate through secure networks and during the times of peace and war. So the BECA, Basic Exchange and Communication Agreements, basically is another step in that direction, which not only completes that foundational agreement, set of foundational agreements, but has a great strategic and security implications, not only for China, but specifically for Pakistan, because India, as rightly pointed out earlier, is not really in a position to fight a direct war with China, but they are already definitely planning and giving threats in that regard that Pakistan is going to be at the receiving end. So as I stated, I'm looking at the signing of BECA at the two levels. The one is the political level, in which it enhances India's political standing at the international level, and also restores its credibility at the domestic front, in front of its in view of its massive failure in containing China and the great problem that it faced against Pakistan during the Balakot strike, and this India's image as a great power at the domestic level was greatly damaged. So this also restores its credibility in terms of giving a sense of more security, and that perception or that sense of false sense of, not entirely false, but definitely increases its posture at the military level. And what implication at military level it might have for Pakistan? Also, it provides access to the classified information to India. In that regard, India would get real-time access to American geospatial intelligence that would enhance the accuracy of automated systems. And as you mentioned earlier, the drones and missiles accuracy would be enhanced significantly. Satellite imageries from the US satellites would improve India's situational awareness. And that, as you can notice, that this would actually be used against Pakistan specifically, because at the line of actual control particularly, India might use the drones instead of aerial vehicles. That would increase its military potential as well as a risk of a human resource, putting its military credibility at risk. So all in all, it's quite a challenge for Pakistan, and definitely there are a number of measures that Pakistan need to take in that regard.
Right, Sitara, please stay with us on Skype. Brigadier Bhatt, the political impetus, let's say, the driving force behind this pact, many people think is political as well. Secretary Pompeo visited Sri Lanka, he visited Maldives, and earlier, as well as I just mentioned in my introduction, he has been focusing on anti-China rhetoric, specifically on Chinese Communist Party, naming it and then using the words that I just mentioned in my introduction. Is it about selling this China fear back in the United States for the public consumption, or is it really about the defense pact, military pact, and India using these things against China and Pakistan?
Again, I think Taimur, Kagad Saab very elaborately covered the bigger picture, and that is the context we should never actually relegate or neglect. Everything is happening in a bigger context. We saw a lot of exhaustion on the part of NATO in Afghanistan and then in the rest of the Middle East, in Iraq and Syria, where we could see that NATO was disenchanted with whatever America was doing, and therefore America ultimately had to take the backbencher seat and let the original proxies crop up and then divide the region into two distinct groups that we all know, one led by Saudi and other by Iran, and then let them fight among themselves. So I think they have done their piece of work in the Middle East. Now the devastation and next battlefield, the war arena like Cold War, has to be Asia Pacific. As I said in last time, that Asia Pacific is a very, very big region. In order to make India happy, America renamed their Pacific Command as the Indo-Pacific Command.
Right.
Right. Why did they do so? Because one, NATO felt exhausted, and they needed more political, more military, and more economic allies who could pump in that much money into the a new game that is going to be the contest between the two big powers, now the China and America. But let's not forget Russia. Russia has also conveyed a lot of resentment on this Quad nexus that is building up in the region. And China obviously is now coming up very obviously. You have just read the statement of the foreign spokesperson of China. They are calling it Cold War mentality, zero-sum game. So what is China hinting at is very important.
But still, they are very cautious, interestingly. Chinese, they are not
But this
using
time
any
they are
aggressive language, and they are rather cautious
No,
about it.
I take the indication of the use of Cold War mentality as an indication or the perception on the part of the China that now the new phase of Cold War has to be fought between China and America with new allies, regional allies, who have some convergence of strategic interests with America. Japan has a history of conflict with China, and the bloodlines are never forgotten. India wants to be following a greater India dream, and out of 7 defense pacts that have been signed between India and America, 5 have been signed during Modi's time from 2014 to 2020. The remaining 2 were otherwise insignificant, which was 2002 and 2012. The meat of the matter is happening now during Modi's time, because the slogan of Greater America and Greater India, that coincides.
Right.
Japan has its conflict on the Kuril Island and other territorial dispute with China. Australia wants to reassert in the Asia Pacific. Now, Senator Saab pointed out the plus side of Quad. The plus side is the remaining 2 members of the UN Security Council, the UK and the France. They would never like to leave the old colonial region of influence, So this is the contest. It's the politics, it's the economic, it is the military side. On the economic side, if I only focus on India, whatever is being given to India is not happening free. America doesn't believe in giving free dinner and lunches. 21 billion India has already paid from 2007 to 2020 in the 13 years. They have already paid 21 billion. So who's going to be the beneficiary of what all is coming to India? It's not going to come free. It's going to cost them a lot of billions of dollars. And well, India tries to do that under Modi's dream. India is going to be bled more on the economic side. But when we talk about the conflict, I think Cold War has its own ways of fighting. You know, we know the Vietnam, the Vietcong, and other arenas where the real battle took place. But the nuclear powers directly do not fight big wars. So Pakistan is a nuclear country, China is a nuclear country, and India, of course, is a nuclear country. And the bigger boss trying to be in the region, the Russia and America, already they have fought a long spell of Cold War. So I am not, I think countries like Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bangladesh, in the region, they got to be more careful. Sri Lanka,
That's right.
Maldives
That's
you
right.
mentioned, where Chinese have made some infrastructure for their navy, for their ships, etc. That is why Pompeo went there. So politically, America is going to exert pressure on the smaller countries. Our turn would come as soon as we deliver the American desire on Afghanistan, we are going to get a lot of pressure. For the time being, you are off the hook. But the moment American desire is fulfilled in Afghanistan, that leverage diminishes, we're
Right.
going to feel the heat.
This, right. This is very interesting. A lot of developments in Middle East and in South Asia, and United States is specifically focusing on its diplomacy in Middle East and South Asia, Senator Kakar. But interestingly, US took India out of its trade preferential status last year, Trump administration, but they want to have a military pact with India. So this is very interesting. On the trade side, they might not be boosting or backing India that much. It's more sort of a transactional relationship, but on the military side, they would back India and would want India to show some kind of aggression. How
Well,
do you
you
see
got to
that?
appreciate and compliment Trump for America First slogan. So whatever suits America, they'll define and translate the relations in terms of trade policy and in terms of military policy. I think so both suits United States interest. That's what they are doing. But more importantly to what our colleague was just referring to, look, all these high techs, all these supersonic missiles or military gadgetry, whatever is being developed in the 21st or forthcoming 22nd century even. The more importantly, I personally feel the military conflict would come to a minimized level, outright military conflict. So what we going to happen? Do the conflicts would just vanish and we would just agree as a peaceful neighbors to each other? I seriously doubt it. But it would be an era of proxies. It would be an era of proxies which would be used against each other. And in that, I already feel that India has chosen a self-destructive path. I mean, look at them, what they have done. Their interference in Sri Lanka with the Tamils. They're giving political asylum to the Dalai Lama from Tibet. Their intervention in Balochistan.
Right.
They are intervening in terms of their proxies throughout the region. So once the Chinese, when they are in the lead role as an economic power, what fault lines they have? The whole of Northeast, starting from Assam to Bangladesh border, and then Arunachal Pradesh and the Seven Sisters, all the area. So if India loses its control over its populace and its territory, it would be a huge psychological blow to that big market and big size India. And I foresee that they would be limited to a Hindi-speaking belt India, which probably is the natural and only option as a political union which has to remain with Indian Federation. So that would be the biggest challenge. No matter what satellite imagery they get from US, that probably wouldn't help them in Assam. That probably would not help them while fighting the Naxal challenge. Manmohan Singh, if you recall, has already identified and called it as an existential threat. So these are the kind of dimensions which India has to look when it wants to have relationship within neighborhood. Their jingoistic policies, particularly under the garb of Hindutva politics, driven by RSS and BJP, it would lead them probably nowhere. They might appear very strong at the moment, but that strength within years would wane and it would just decline, in my opinion.
This is very interesting. And Sitara, this narrative and the rhetoric that US has been using, Secretary Pompeo himself, specifically against the Chinese Communist Party, using the words like exploitation and coercion and corruption by the Chinese Communist Party. How do you see this? This is mere rhetoric, or is US trying to frame India in a specific way and want probably India and the Quad to also follow the lead of this narrative?
So for that, we probably need to take a step back and see how US policy towards China has been evolving for the past couple of years. So if we look at how US defense policy postures, reviews, and documents are coming out, for almost 2 years now, they have started using the competition that they used to have with China has now more or less change into a confrontational outlook. So there is a consistent shift in American policy towards China, and that's probably as a reaction to Chinese massive rise in the economic domain and the Chinese rise of China overall in the region, not only in the Asia Pacific, but also what US perceives would eventually be threatening American might in the long run. So the change of tone from the American officials is partly a result of that sense of apprehension that has coming into American policymaker for the past almost few years now. And now what we see the current development in the region, what impact would it have precisely is that it would increase polarization in the region. What India has done by the signing of these foundational agreements, this is, I mean, in essence, US and India have had this ad hoc agreement, exchange of information on ad hoc basis for quite some time now. I mean, even if you look at what CAMCASA provides India, or actually what LIMOA that was signed in 2016, the ad hoc agreement were there where they had exchanged such sort of information. And same goes for BECA related information that Ladakh and during Ladakh conflict particularly, India had this access to America. But what the signing has done, they have actually formalized this relationship. And as a result of that formalization of the relationship, polarization in the region would increase primarily because now India cannot hold that status of non-aligned state status anymore. Now India has directly officially become an ally of the United States in the region. And that would actually have a greater impact on the regional security dynamics also. What India used to hold as what India was fearing for quite some time now, and there were political debates on that as well, that India does not want to be a US ally and want to fight America's war against China. But this is precisely what is happening now. And so basically, this is why there is some sort of criticism within India's political leadership as well, from the political leadership as well, that this is not the role India should have envisaged for itself, and in the longer run, that would be problematic. But as I stated earlier, there might be some long-term challenges for India and the US and China, but primarily immediate concern definitely is for Pakistan, because it also pushes Pakistan in that polarization. And while Pakistan does not want to, or has not reached at a point where it has to choose between the United States or China, but if this polarization in terms of security situation continues, there would be a time where Pakistan would have to choose between either it wants to be in the Chinese camp or in the US camp. That would be a problematic situation for Pakistan as well, because definitely given our close collaboration with China, not only at political security and all defense related agreements, Pakistan does not definitely move away from China. But definitely it would be challenging for Pakistan to move away from the United States as well. But the overall situation, how it is developing, probably that day would not be really far where this polarization would impact Pakistan's choices as well.
Right. Very interesting, Sitara. Brigadier, but looking at US foreign policy and their interest in the region, as I mentioned earlier, pulling out troops from Syria, pulling out troops from Afghanistan, but at the same time working on the diplomatic front, UAE with Israel and other countries in the Middle East having their diplomatic relations with Israel. In South Asia and Asia, Quad, and then putting and pitching India against China. So on the diplomatic front, we see that US has been playing pretty proactively.
Right.
How do you see this? Their intentions, US diplomatic front?
I think to the advantage of Israel, America, and especially Trump, whether it was to please Israel, to please his son-in-law on the latter end, but he has delivered a lot in terms of bringing stability to Israel, as a matter of fact. whatever you mentioned, I think it's a great success as far as Israel is concerned, but Trump was obviously playing the front role in that.
Right.
So on the political side, if Trump has been able to do that, do not forget what diplomatic advantages actually taken by China has disturbed America. BRI is touching more than 130 countries. More than 60 countries are real participants. So regional and international connectivity, which is the economic one, ultimately becomes and provides China the greatest political dividend, and the economic dividend, and obviously that will flow into the military domain. So these three
Strategic upper
aspects
hand
need to
as
be
well.
kept. So what is disturbing American security calculus is actually the BRI concept of China, and they started worrying about it about 20 years ago, not now. So it has taken America to make a greater shift in their foreign policy from the Atlantic region and the European region. They have done away with the Middle East, as you mentioned. No, they are now focusing on where the future economic arena is. It's the Pacific region, the Asia Pacific region.
So interestingly, do you see that US is kind of outsourcing
Right?
the conflicts to other countries, probably outsourcing, let's say, Middle East to Israel,
Right.
and then outsourcing the China conflict to India?
Wouldn't say that about Israel, outsourcing to Israel, but as I said earlier, they have already created that cleavage which will linger on for quite some time, and it will bleed only the Muslim world. But Israel, of course, gets a lot of reprieve because of this phenomena that the Muslim countries are trying to befriend Israel. So that leaving Israel aside, because we are discussing now Asia Pacific,
Right.
let me say again that the globe, 70% of the globe is water, the oceans, and out of those 70%, 50% is the Pacific Ocean. And when we talk about Asia Pacific region, we are talking about more than 50% population of the world. We are talking
right.
about 14 time zones which are covered by American Pacific Command. So the future, all trade routes, they pass through this region. So it is about the domination of the sea lines of communication and the land lines of communication, which have been challenged greatly by Chinese ingress into Africa, into Middle East, into Central Asia, Eurasia, South Asia. So China has already, as Senator Saab said, is almost there. They wanted to become number one economy in the world.
Right.
So whichever is number one economy ultimately becomes number one military force in the world. So that is why we are looking at, and you rightly pointed out, that when this Asia Pacific region becomes another arena for a new phase of Cold War, the regional countries like India, Pakistan, Japan, Australia, Philippines, Korea is waiting on the fringes of all this, which way to join. So they will revive, they may like to revive their old conflicts, and try to settle within the gambit that has just been displayed.
Right.
So when we talk about India, Pakistan, so in the garb of contesting and containing China, India is going to first gradually, in my view, going to settle the dispute through limited military conflicts, which will be backed up by Quad and the Quad Plus.
Right.
So that is the source of worry for me, for any Pakistani. Likewise, I think people sitting in Nepal or Bangladesh or Sri Lanka, they would also be feeling upset about it, but whatever military potency is being given to India is actually going to hurt them first before they hurt China. So we are going to see another, maybe a long spell of regional conflict, which will be fought under the umbrella of this great game, as was the case during the Cold War.
Right.
So it was fought all over the world. Cold War was not limited to any particular region. So that is what we are looking at. So Asia Pacific, I think, is becoming the hottest flashpoint as a big region, which is covering more than 50% of the globe. So it's very, very perilous.
Absolutely. And so these two paradigms, Senator Kakar. So US can offer what to the countries in Asia Pacific, let's say, or in South Asia? China is offering BRI, more economic opportunities, but at this moment we see that the only thing that US can offer is military pacts. Probably not much countries would be having strong economic relations with the United States. Do you see it that way?
Well, to be honest with you, to me it seems that the decline, the diminishing American imperialistic military economic power is more sophisticated than the collapse of Soviet Union, which we experienced a few decades ago.
More
It's
sophisticated,
thoughtful.
right?
Yes, it's very thoughtful. They are withdrawing, they are leaving this region, and the energy corridors, the energy trade, which requires the security guarantee, which has been provided by the United States for last 6 or 7 decades, post Second World War. The main beneficiaries were the rest of the world, but the security cost was beared by the United States. So they probably are no more in the same economic fashion that they can continue with that role. So they are withdrawing, they are taking a back step, and they are trying to create a viable alternate. Like, for instance, in Middle East, I do not have any doubt. This is not 1948's Israel. It's not the same Israel which has seen 3 Arab-Israel wars of 73 and so on and so forth. It's a military might. Everyone knows under the nuclear umbrella, they do have nuclear capability, though an undeclared one. It's an economic might. They do have a lot of technological advanced capabilities in different economic realms, and so they are relatively a stable state in the region. So if you put in and push India with them as an ally, probably they could provide some sort of a security umbrella, maybe to GCC countries or maybe to Arab state of Hormuz. I don't know. But they must be on cards. And we as a Pakistani nation, as a nation state, has to be wary of all these developments. Instead of just showing emotional outbursts, either about others' capabilities or our own, we have to be very prudent and balanced and thoughtful and see all these developments which are occurring in the region, particularly in the region, because we have a regional role. We are a mid-sized country. We have mid-sized capacity and influence also. We shouldn't be looking beyond our reach. But this is our area of influence. What is happening in the immediate Middle East, whatever the Middle East is called, what is happening between GCC and Iran, between Turkey and GCC. So we have to strike a kind of a balance where Pakistan can and has to play a very balanced and important role. But if we have got knee-jerk responses and not a thoughtful one,
right,
I fear we may not lose on this historic turning point. So we have to be very prudent and careful.
Right. Sitara, what are the key concerns regarding this military pact and the changes that Senator Kakar just mentioned? What are the key concerns, strategic concerns that Pakistan should be focused on?
Before that, if I can just quickly give a small reference to the Blue Dot Network, Taimur, as you pointed out, that what are the alternatives to the BRI? So this Blue Dot Network is actually touted as you may call an alternative to BRI, which was announced in 2019 by the US, Japan, and Australia at the Indo-Pacific Business Forum last year. Although the rationale and the real potential of that Blue Dot Network is yet to be seen, but as the proposal stands, there is the prospects of billions of dollars of investments with more openness and more transparent manner. Which is the lack of transparency, which according to US is one of the major criticism on the BRI project. So they are trying to provide an alternative. But its potential and its real impact is yet to be seen, how it progresses and how, if at all, it can provide an alternative to BRI, which has already expanded to the world over and is already is providing infrastructural development and all sorts of economic benefits to the rest of the world. As far as what Brigadier Saab and Senator Saab had already pointed out in terms of the security concerns, he rightly stated that Pakistan's strategy has to be very prudent and very thoughtful, because this is one of those times where Pakistan stands at the crossroads where it has to be very cautious of what step it takes forward. And in my view, while Pakistan definitely needs to share its legitimate security concerns with the US, because it's not only continuing to play its important role in US withdrawal from Afghanistan, but as I rightly pointed out, that once that withdrawal or the US presence in Afghanistan is completed or comes to an end, probably Pakistan would again become a target and less of an ally and more of a source of criticism, would become a source of criticism, target of criticism rather. And but at current situation, as I stated earlier, Pakistan probably would have to face this challenge of whether it wants to ally closely with China or choose with the US. I think Pakistan need to stand in the middle and try to play the role of the bridge that it did in the 70s. Although it's naive to expect that that kind of role would be easy this time, but certainly Pakistan as the middle power, which has its close relationship with China and definitely has its connection and continue to have its relationship with the United States as well, should play that role of the stabilizer instead of siding entirely with the China or become target of that fights of become or come into the middle of that crossfire between the United States and China.
Right,
So
right,
Pakistan,
right, Sitara. Brigadier, but what are the key concerns that you think Pakistan should convey to the United States, that we are concerned about this military pact? Of course, our Foreign Office is concerned about it. What are the key concerns?
I think the concerns have been very adequately, in a very good lingo, have already been conveyed to the statement of Foreign Office, and I would like to repeat those. In any case, these things continue to get conveyed, but they do not make any difference in the bigger picture at all. So I do not hope anything coming out of conveying so far concerns. But what we need to do is basically, that is what we need to concentrate on. I agree with Senator Shah, what he was trying to point out. I think when there is the tectonic shifts taking place in the alliances, economic alliances, the military alliances, the political alliances, the countries like Pakistan with very limited resource, we have to, find solace and protection and umbrella in these kind of regional and extra-regional alliances which are already there. Pakistan is part of SCO. Pakistan is part of BRI. China-Pakistan economic corridor is a thorn in the eye of all hostile
Flagship
countries.
project, right.
But we also need to expand our security umbrella. One security umbrella that we have remained oblivious to, I continue to harp on it, Collective Security Treaty Organization. All Central Asian Republic have a Russian umbrella. Iran is member state of that now. Pakistan could be very well part of that. 20 years ago, nobody knew about SCO in Pakistan, whereas it had already included all the Central Asian Republic.
Right.
We are already too late to jump onto that bus. So CSTO is one potent military alliance in the region. China is an observer state. Pakistan is also observer. But we need to become member if we want the security umbrella, because when these things happen, we do not become pawn. And we do not become victim of any conflict in the region.
Absolutely. Senator Kakar, of course, Pakistan has the strong strategic affiliation with China, but keeping a balance is also very important with the United States and with China. How do you think? What do you think about that, briefly?
The answer would be given by the China itself. China, I do not foresee into a direct military conflict with US. So we shouldn't fear much. So there has to be some sort of posturing between the US and China, but outright military conflict seems unlikable to be. So there is a overstated fear within our psyche when we respond to such situations. So the answer would be given by the China. We need to balance ourselves anyway. Chinese are the biggest trade partner with the United States. They are the biggest investor in terms of bonds into the US economy. So why do we are having an unwanted fear or unfounded fear on which we are basing the entire edifice of a policy or a philosophy? So we should be calm, we should be normal and give normal responses to the challenges which emerge.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Brigadier Bhatt, pleasure having on the show. Thank you for your time. Senator Kakar, pleasure having you on the show. Thank you for your time. Sitara, thank you for your time. Pleasure having you on the show. Thank you for joining us. That's all from today's dialogue. See you next time. Khuda Hafiz. Wonderful, sir.